When I met today's guest in 2016, he was on a flight from Tanzania to Cape Town. We started chatting about craft beer and the beer book. Little did I know that he was ready to give up his corporate job with SAB in Tanzania to start something in the craft beer industry. 3 years later, TinyKeg Canning was born to offer mobile canning services to craft brewers in the Western Cape. Please welcome mobile canning pioneer Tom Riley to the show. My name is Holger Meyer, and this is DrinksWorld. Welcome to the show. And today our guest is Tom Riley. Tom is the MD of the TinyKeg Can Company. And as you can hear from the words or the name, it's got to do with cans. And Tom, you have had a long walk with beer. It looks like you worked for SAB for a while and then even for Distel. Tell us a little bit about your background with SAB and how you ended up at SAB.
How's it, Olga? Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show. Yeah, I mean, I joined SAB more than 10 years ago now. In the UK, so I was based in the Woking office, and my job was mergers and acquisitions. So I was tasked with traveling around the world and finding beer companies to buy.
Wow, so, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. So I drank SAB beers my entire life, and then my return on investment was finding a proper job with them, and. It was an awesome opportunity. I mean, they actually, to be honest, they had no right to hire me in that role. I knew less than nothing about corporate finance. I had an engineering background. I'd been in retail banking, of all things, in South Africa. And then I'd gone overseas to study. And out of those studies, I'd managed to meet someone from SAB, meet the right person to speak to, and ended up getting this job, which was way above my pay grade at the time. But I worked with an amazing group of people, and they managed to get me up to speed pretty quickly. So.
And do you think it was because you were South African?
I think it definitely had something to do with it. Like, even if I don't think it was something explicit where it was like this job is reserved for South Africans or something, but I was working with mostly other South African guys, and all the senior leadership of the business were South Africans. So there was a real shared culture and a shared way of working, which is very apparent. When I walked into meetings with these senior leaders, and it felt like having a chat with some friends at a braai at home. And I think when things work naturally like that, then, it just kind of makes sense. And so I don't think it was necessarily because I was South African, but it certainly didn't hurt.
Yeah. And what deals did you make? Can you share some of those with us?
So these deals take a hell of a long time. So
you never see the end of it.
You never really quite see the end of it, also I moved on from mergers and acquisition. I was actually really only there for probably about 2 years, if I think back, before I moved more into, I wanted to be in a general management role then with SAB. I realized once I'd gotten into this M&A job, it's awesome to put the deal together and you work sort of on a project by project basis, but I realized quite quickly that my real passion was for building something. I wanted to be more involved in building something for a longer period of time, and so I kind of set my sights on a general management type of role with SAB, and so transitioned with SAB into that sort of space. So I moved then from the UK to South Africa as an executive assistant, which I'm not sure if they still do those kind of things, but it was, basically like a training role where I had exposure to some of the most senior people in the South Africa business, and they sort of put me in various positions. So running sales teams, for example, or running a distribution operation, those kind of things where you kind of learn the nuts and bolts of the business.
Sounds to me, it sounds to me as if they really saw a lot of potential in you.
Well, I mean, I guess if they didn't, they wasted a lot of money on airfares. But no, I mean, I had great relationships, and I got along very well with all the leaders of the business. So it just felt natural and easy. But yeah, I mean, you asked, and I guess I maybe sidestepped a little bit, but there was one very interesting deal that we looked at in Myanmar. I can kind of, SAB ended up not doing the deal. Another global beer company has done it, and looking back, it's probably a good thing we didn't do that deal, because there's some issues there, with the military rulers of that country, and so where things were heading in a certain direction, 9-10 years ago when we had a look at the business, they've now gone back in the other direction, and I think in hindsight we would have maybe regretted making that deal. Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting, and it's great. It's great to be able to look back and have a bit of that context and think about, the type of decisions we were trying to make and how those have ended up working, down the line.
Yeah. Okay. And how did it work out at the more general business management stuff?
So after another probably 18 months or 2 years in the South Africa business, I was up in Joburg, and I was running, for example, running the sales team in Isando and learning about selling beer in South Africa and how this market works. I then got an opportunity to join one of SAB's businesses in Tanzania. It was a shift from beer to spirits. So SAB had a stake still has in the spirits business in Tanzania. Called Tanzania Distilleries, and I went up there, and I was there unfortunately only for a year at the end. That was then when the merger or the acquisition of SAB by AB InBev was sort of finalized, and at that stage, I took a step back and had a look at this new business, and tried to imagine if I was coming from the outside, coming in, would I want to join this business as I had wanted to join the SAB business? And clearly I decided it wasn't, it just wasn't exactly right for me. I mean, I think it's a great business, and, obviously it's difficult to take over an animal like SAB, and it can take some time. And I think, they've obviously had challenges, but it just didn't appeal to me. And as you might, I don't know if you remember, Holger, but we met in about 2016 when I was in Tanzania, and at the time I was picking your brain about the craft business in South Africa and about craft beer, so that had actually been on my mind and had been part of my my thinking, my future kind of music. For some time, and I think the takeover of SAB by AB InBev and the uncertainty that came with that, I think, was just kind of the push that I needed to come back to SA and give it a crack doing my own thing.
I remember that conversation, Tom, and I thought, you're a bit of a romantic. It's the end of the first craft beer wave, and here's this guy with a proper job, and he wants to get into craft beer. And I thought, stick with what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, even if you had told me that, I probably wouldn't have listened to you. But as I sit here today, I wonder if it wouldn't have maybe been a good idea. It was very prudent advice, Holger.
Your pension fund might have been a bit better.
Yeah, that is for sure. I think that's and my stress levels were the numbers were bigger, but the stress was lower. Like I think when with starting something and bringing people into a business which you've kind of, conceptualized and pushed into creation, it's extremely stressful, and it's stressful because it's so personal.
Yeah.
With a big business, there's always some kind of healthy arm's length relationship between yourself and the business, but when you started it yourself, it's very difficult to have that.
Yeah, and so after we kind of met, you didn't stay at SAB much longer. Obviously, it was because of the takeover, and I see you also did a short stint at Distell.
Yeah, so as it turned out, I didn't, it didn't take a year, for example, while I had time to kind of build my next move, or when I made the decision to leave SAB, it all happened quite quickly. At almost exactly the same time, I had my third child, my daughter Emily, and I needed to take paternity leave, obviously to help my wife through the process, and we were living in Tanzania, so Emily was born in the UK, and I got some resistance from my then manager at SAB. His comment was, "Oh, but it's AB InBev. I'm not sure if that's going to be feasible." So that was kind of let's say the final push. So it wasn't a case of waiting for months and building a plan B. It kind of all happened, all happened quite quickly. And so my wife and I came back to South Africa with our family. And it's only really once we landed here that the plan for next steps, kind of really started in earnest. And I was very fortunate then, not long after arriving in South Africa, to get a call and ask if I was at all interested in joining or helping Distell. They were looking for someone in mergers and acquisitions. So I'd left M&A with SAB a few years before, but I guess still had some relevant knowledge and network, etc. And so and so I got an offer from Distell. I never joined them. I never joined them permanently. I kind of told them from the beginning that, look, I'm working on this idea and on a plan, to start a business. But in the interim, I'm very, very happy selling my time and kind of getting back on the M&A bandwagon, which I did, and I had a great time. I worked with some really cool people at Distell and learned a bit more about the other categories of alcohol and whatever in South Africa. So it was actually a fantastic opportunity for me coming back into SA to kind of really reestablish some kind of network and some kind of understanding of the local industry. So yeah, that was great. And I did that work for them probably for a year or just over a year before the TinyKeg adventure went from conceptual to real world,
Yeah.
At which stage I then shifted to full-time doing what I'm doing now.
When we met on the flight you were on a flight from Tanzania, I guess, to Cape Town, you then ended up buying a copy of the beer book. And you said off air that book actually made a difference in your decision.
Yeah, it really did. I was very aware of the fact that I knew very little about what was actually happening in craft beer in South Africa. And I love beer. It's kind of my go-to, and it's always been a passion of mine. So while particularly not when I worked for SAB, I didn't really know much about the product itself, or even that much about the process of making it and etc. But I was really keen to stay in beer, and I saw what was happening in craft beer in South Africa as an opportunity maybe to do that. So that book really did help me understand the market and start to sort of formulate some plans around how I was going to approach it, or what type of business, was I going to start a craft brewery, or was I going to start a business in the service, on the service side. And actually, as I'm talking now, I've just remembered that when I paged through your book and I saw at the end of the book there was a list of craft brewers, and then there was a list of service providers to the craft beer industry, and it was quite apparent to me that there were a lot less service providers than brewers. And I think that's actually, it was one of the sort of key data points for me early on, just to shift my thinking from trying to launch a brand in a amongst a multitude of other brands, to actually, take a slightly different approach to entering that world.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that.
So you went to start selling shovels instead of digging for gold.
Exactly. That's exactly the analogy we used at the time. So, yeah.
And when I got a call from another canning company in Joburg recently, and I said to him exactly the same thing. In amongst all these 500 new liquor producers, if you think about all the new craft brewers, all the new craft gin makers, there are so many more people that have come onto the market in the last 10 years making liquor. I said he's doing exactly the right thing by starting a canning factory instead of trying to compete with another liquor brand.
Yeah, look, I do think so. I guess what I'm learning more and more now is that, if you do have a successful brand, then you build some kind of a moat, whereas contract packaging, is I guess you have to constantly reinvent yourself, or constantly be on it. You don't get the same strategic benefit that a successful brand would get you, but on the flip side of that coin, the successful brands are very few and far between. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still hoping to find the perfect recipe.
Yeah. In my long career in the beer industry, I've only had one or maybe one and a half, and the half was when we launched Bavaria Draft, and it was at a time when SAB was really trying to antagonize every retailer or pub that was selling draft. They hated selling draft, and along came these aggressive youngsters, and we converted every old Castle draft tap into a Bavaria tap with a sticker and a few tools. And and we were quite successful. I mean, we sold hundreds of kegs of Bavaria in KZN in those days, before SAB woke up and realized, there was something happening. And then the other one was when we successfully launched Bavaria Light in KZN, and it was at a time when the local speed cops were very aggressive with the drinking and driving, and everybody seemed to have picked up the taste for Bavaria Light, and we sold tons and tons and pallets of Bavaria Light. So those were the two really where I managed to be part of a team that was built a successful brand. So it is very difficult, I guess.
It is difficult. I mean, I've seen many entries and not that many successes.
Yeah.
And you really got to stick on it, because it doesn't come quick.
Yeah, and if you're in the wrong category, it also doesn't help. So I was talking to the guys at one of the craft brewers, and he's probably the biggest IPA. And that wasn't good enough because IPA is such a small category. So he was really wanted to be the biggest lager, I guess. And so, yeah, there's all these challenges for the brands as well. So can you talk?
Yeah, and I think that, yes.
Yeah, maybe share with us how your decision making went from wanting to do something in the craft industry, and then how did you discover canning?
So I guess it happened over a couple of years. I'd actually spoken. I think it was in 2015. I was in the UK, and I'd met a craft brewer there. The brand's called Gypsy Hill, through a friend of mine, and had a chat to him about his business and having a look at what was happening in craft in South Africa. So, I mean, that was probably a good 18 months before I met you. So I was really kind of intrigued by the craft space for quite a while before. What he mentioned to me was he had two things that he thought would be great opportunities, and the one was a keg rental business, or keg leasing business, and in the UK and the US, you have to do some really big businesses that do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other was in mobile canning.
Okay.
And I then kind of got wind of the idea, started having a look and seeing that this is what was happening in the USA. I guess everyone, and more so at that time, I guess we still hope that our craft beer market will take the path that the US one did. But I think at the time there was kind of this general, like a bit of a noise maybe around the fact that now the South African craft beer market was on exactly the same trend as what had driven US craft beer to 20% or whatever, within a few short years. So I was very intrigued by what was happening in craft beer in the US, and I actually thought that the mobile canning was one of the key drivers of that shift that happened in the US, and that sort of pushed craft beer to where it eventually has ended up. And so I saw that there were a few let's say key aspects of mobile canning. It meant that you could get an expert to come in and someone that I mean, when you work for SAB, there's brewers and then there's packaging people, and it's like it's a completely different job. It's a completely different world almost, even though you're working in the same facility, And when you're a craft brewer, you need to try and be expert at all of it, right? At the brewing and the packaging, and then you have to own all the equipment to be able to do all of it. So it just seemed obvious to me that someone could come in and bring some real expertise to the packaging side, which is frankly as important as the brewing to get right. So I did a bit of research about what was happening there, try to understand how the guys were achieving what they were achieving, and doing a bit of research on that. And so that's, I guess, really where the idea of mobile canning first came to me. And then when coming back to SA, after SAB and during the time that I was working with Distel, I started building on that idea. I met a guy called Rob Haynes, who I know has been on your podcast a number of times, and he'd started the League of Beers and was very involved in the craft beer industry at the time with Yappy Chef. And we started chatting, and we met shortly after I arrived back in Cape Town. We got on with each other, and so we started building this idea of starting a mobile canning business. And I guess that was the genesis of it.
Okay. I remember in 2017 I was in Munich at DrinkTech, and I met these micro brewery canning people. I think it was Cask, and I thought there's no ways anybody in South Africa, any of the craft brewers in South Africa can or will ever be able to afford one of these canning lines.
We have two now, not Cask, but they're not dissimilar.
Okay.
I actually went. I actually went to Canada. I think I might have mentioned it to you, but I actually went to Canada when researching the canning equipment, and before importing our first canning line, and I went and met the family that started and ran that business. They're wonderful people.
Yeah.
It was a really cool trip here.
So you went on this trip to find the actual equipment. How many are there? Lots of different manufacturers in the States or in North America that make these things, because it surely it's on trend now. I mean, everybody is doing cans.
So I mean, at the time there were two really let's say standout companies. The one was Cask, as you mentioned, and the other was Wild Goose. So those are the two businesses that I visited. There's now a few others doing it, and from what I understand, they've had some positive traction. I think for me, at the end of the day, I really enjoyed getting to know the folks from Cask, and it was an awesome experience. And I think the canning line is great. But straight after meeting them in Canada, I went to the US and went to meet the folks from Wild Goose. But I think also importantly, the folks from Wild Goose set me up with a mobile canning company in Denver called Craft Canning. And I spent a couple of days with the team from Craft Canning actually out on the road doing mobile canning jobs,
Okay.
And so I got to see the Wild Goose machine really in action, doing exactly what I wanted to do with it. And it also, it was also made very apparent to me by the sales guy at Wild Goose that, well over 90% of the mobile canning companies in the US only use one type of canning line. And, given that at the time, as I've explained, I didn't come from packaging. I don't have a technical beer or packaging background. I studied engineering at university, but that doesn't make me an engineer, And so I I defaulted to the option that most of the other guys had chosen, I guess.
Okay.
And that was the Wild Goose canning line.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, it's a decision I'm very happy with. We've built a good relationship with Wild Goose. We're now TinyKeg are now the agents for Wild Goose equipment in South Africa. So kind of putting our money where our mouths are, I guess. It's the machine has been incredible for us. The fact that we can load it onto a truck and take it off the truck every single day and drive all over. I mean, we often do canning runs out in Bredasdorp for Fraser's Folly and Black Oyster Catcher wines, for example. So I mean, that's a fair distance. We've gone as far as Barrington's in Plet for canning runs. So to be able to load all the kit up onto a truck and drive it that distance and then take it off the truck and it just works. That's a pretty amazing proof of concept, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, you're talking.
That was a bit about that.
Yeah, did you Barrington? So with Hilton Nagel?
Yes, that's right.
We went to the Wild Coast with him last year, and he had all these unlabeled cans, and I guess you canned those.
No comment. It was during lockdown.
It was during lockdown, yes.
But I will say that the demand, we call them blank cans, and I will say that the demand for blank cans was very highly correlated with the lockdown levels.
Yeah.
So we saw our business. I mean, it's fascinating to watch, but how quickly things shifted. And I think, I guess it was survival. For us as a small business. We went from one canning line to two canning lines, and in fact, because there were delays in production and we'd already kind of started taking bookings and things, so we ended up air freighting our second canning line to South Africa at massive expense. And it arrived here in the middle of February 2020, at which point we'd also doubled the size of our team in order to run the second canning line. And, not 6 weeks later, we were all sitting at home twiddling our thumbs. So it was a pretty hairy time for us as a business. But yeah, the fact that we had some demand continued throughout that time, so that was great.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your expectations of your business and what has really happened. I assume you keep talking about craft beer, and I mean, I've picked up that you do a lot of canning for other products.
Yeah. So, I think a few things happened in craft beer. I think on the one side, my, let's say, analysis or understanding of the industry wasn't what it is now, let's say. So I probably made a few assumptions which were over generous in terms of what the industry looked like and where it could, where it was going. I think probably at the same time with the SAB, or the AB InBev acquisition of SAB, the SAB strategy towards their premium brands changed quite a lot. And I guess the strategy towards all their brands, but it impacted in particular the premium brands, and that sort of changed the equation a little bit for craft producers. At the end of the day, it's consumers still making an affordability assessment based on how much they like your brand and whatever. But if they can pick up a Stella and if Stella's prices decreased by 10 or 20%, then suddenly that makes the craft beer comparatively 10 or 20% more expensive and makes it that much more difficult and makes the hurdle that much higher before you pick up that craft beer. So I think quite a lot of that stuff happened at the time, and then there were the economic woes of different economic woes to our current economic woes, which also had an impact. And craft beer. I think the really, really difficult thing in craft beer, the most challenging thing that I've found is actually packaging and distributing a beer. If you can package a beer and sell it out of your tap room, that's still okay. But if you need a distribution margin and a retailer margin before a consumer picks it up off the shelf, it's extremely difficult to make a high quality beer, to package it at quality, to have a quality packaging, and then be able to distribute it around the country. And that's aside from the other key issue, which is cold chain.
Yeah.
So actually maintaining the quality of that beer. And I think that's one of the key differences between craft beer in the US and how the sort of hoppier and crazier beers, the IPAs and things like that, have managed to gain so much more traction there. And I think a key part of that is the fact that they're that much fresher when they arrive at the consumer because they've been kept in cold chain. And in South Africa, that's not really a viable option. So these are all things I didn't necessarily understand completely, before I started my journey. But I think one of our key, I guess there's two really key principles. The two most important principles that that we try to hold on to at TinyKeg are quality and flexibility. And from a flexibility point of view, we immediately became aware that there was interest elsewhere in canning, and in sort of some lower volume canning, let's say, more flexible canning. And I started attending a lot of meetings with wineries that were that were interested in putting wine in cans or had been approached by existing distributors in other markets, and these distributors were requesting a canned wine product. So even before starting TinyKeg, I was aware that wine in cans was a thing and was growing, internationally. But I always, I guess, kind of assumed that it would take a few years. Well, it will take a few years to catch on in South Africa if it does. And I always assumed that to be the case. But what I didn't, I guess, really see initially was that there'd be immediate interest in exporting these products. Mm-hmm. And given that we based ourselves in Cape Town, there's a massive producer base here of wineries, and so we just we went back to our investors and asked them for some more cash to buy change parts and to buy various other bits of equipment that we needed to go into wine packaging, and when we started canning wines. Let's say formally, we did a lot of trial runs and samples and things like that. But probably in about October, November of what was it now, 2019. So we started in February of 2019. The first canning line arrived, and then towards the end of that year, we started with wine. And there was immediate interest in the wine, and also obviously the as I said, the craft beer market has shifted quite a lot. So what our business looks like now, just a few years later, is nothing like what we thought it would look like when we started.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I went on this journey, and even just 3 years down the line, I couldn't possibly have predicted, what the business would look like at this stage.
So how does it look? Is wine the majority of your business?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is the majority of what we do, and I think I feel like we had some impact in craft beer, and if you have a look at craft beers now, you'll see how many of them are in can, where virtually none were in can, before we started. But what has happened, a few things have happened. We established a relationship with BevCan, who've been fantastic partners to us. It was always very difficult for smaller brewers to even get hold of cans from BevCan.
Yeah.
They have to send a truck down to Cape Town from Joburg. You need to be buying a hell of a lot of cans, or have a really big warehouse if you're a craft brewer and you want to buy half a truck or a truck full of cans. But with our sort of aggregation of can demand, we're now able to offer blank cans to craft brewers. So when we're bringing or getting a truck from a delivery from BevCan, and a lot of those cans are cans that we'll fill, but we also sell cans to other producers, that aren't taking full truckloads. And so I think that's allowed a lot of smaller craft brewers to shift to cans. I think there was always, the understanding might not exist so much, or might not have existed amongst craft beer consumers, but it certainly did exist amongst the craft beer producers, understanding that a can is a better package for a beer than a glass bottle.
Yeah.
And I think that's in combination with the opportunity to brand a can. At the end of the day, one craft beer bottle looks exactly like the next craft beer bottle if you're just buying console craft bottles, So there's a lot more opportunity to differentiate the look and feel of the product in a can, a lot bigger canvas for your brand, let's say.
Yeah. I really like what some of the guys are doing on the cans, eh?
Yeah, and it's amazing. And I think, I feel great that we kind of were part of enabling that shift, But a lot of a few South African companies started offering local let's say, canning, manual versions of the canning lines and local canning solutions. And it, became affordable for a small craft brewer just to manually, package their product. And particularly, if they, we've got some very expensive equipment where we can assess, whether our packaging is being done correctly. So, for example, a device called a C-Box Anton Par, which can measure dissolved oxygen in beer. And that's the key factor in determining whether your beer is going to have a decent shelf life or if it's going to taste like a stale biscuit a week later. And, we invested in this equipment. Like I said, the two things that we really stood on were quality and flexibility. The flexibility I've addressed, and the quality issue, the quality was, well, we put our money where our mouths, we invested behind, we wanted to say that we were quality, but also be able to show, and we did that through investing in the best equipment that we could. And I think, so while a small craft brewer doesn't necessarily have access to a C-Box, if they do their job right, they can still achieve a better results with canning than they can with bottling, firstly. And secondly, if they then keep the product close to home, try and keep it cold in the fridge, in the tap room or something like that, and not try and send it from Joburg to Cape Town and sell it on the other side of the country, then they can really achieve great results, So with that shift happening, if a craft brewer, if someone makes 1,000 liters of beer and they want to put 500 liters in keg and sell it in their tap room and put the other 500 liters in can, I think that's where a lot of the demand in the South African craft beer industry would be. But 500 liters is very, very difficult to justify, if you've got a truck full of expensive equipment and we're employing people and you have to send them kind of around the Western Cape to go and package 500 liters of beer. It's just not feasible. So I think we probably weren't flexible enough for the size of most of the craft brewers, that we ended up working with. Yeah.
So what is a feasible kind of amount? Or
so our stated MOQs for a mobile job is 3,000 liters.
Okay.
So we've often done much smaller jobs than that. We have to compensate in pricing. So we charge per sellable can. So if a can gets dropped or underfilled or something like that, we don't charge. We only charge for cans that are ready to go to market at the end of our canning run. And we had to compensate to do smaller jobs by charging more per can. So we've got a pricing schedule, but it obviously it just makes it more and more difficult. As I've said, it's already difficult to package a beer and distribute it and make any money out of it. So obviously, if your unit cost goes up, then it just becomes more and more complicated.
Yeah.
And so the sort of manual canning option, manual canning line option was a great option for a lot of craft brewers.
So are there a lot of little seamers, or what do you call those little canning operations around the Western Cape?
Yeah, so quite a few guys are canning their own products now. Yeah, quite a few of them.
Okay, and what you are saying is it's really as a result of what you started. I've seen it.
I think what I was saying is I hope that we played some part in driving that shift. You know, I'm not quite arrogant or confident enough to say that it was because of what we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a global trend happening, and I think we kind of played into that trend, and maybe unlocked a few doors. But yeah.
Yeah, so I saw a brewery, or I was told of a brewery who just spent 350,000 rand on a SEMA. Is that kind of what you're looking at for a small setup?
Um, for SEMA alone, no.
Okay.
You can buy a SEMA for a lot less than that, and then you can just use I guess, like a beer tap or something to fill the beers. But there are a number of options which are a little bit more automated than that. So there's like a conveyor belt and a full head, which is kind of dialed in and whatever. So it's not just a SEMA. So you do have let's say a canning machine, but just one where you kind of manually do everything. Whereas ours is a little bit more automated.
Okay. Tom, what else are you seeing? Are you experiencing a demand for canning from other beverage categories? And I'm thinking specifically of something like hard seltzers.
Yeah, so I think there's absolutely that trend is very much happening right now. We have recently taken quite a big step for a small business, and we went back to our investors and we've invested again in a packaging facility. So we now have our own tanks and cooling and carbonation and the wet floor where we can operate and enough space to store all our cans and things. We were originally sharing a 160 square meter warehouse unit in Deep River, and you can't store a lot of cans in half of 160 square meters. So we ran out of space quite spectacularly and quite quickly. But yeah, so we've recently moved to a much bigger space, and the reason for doing that is exactly what you said. There's demand, I think, for these new kind of drinks. Whether they, just hard seltzers or the low calorie kind of sparkling products. There's also, within canned wine in the US, for example, a big part of that category is carbonated wine. And then, even other subcategories, so sort of seltzers, which are wine-based instead of being ethanol-based. So you've got a completely different flavor profile, and it's much lower alcohol, let's say, than a full-bodied wine, or a full wine. So it's kind of wine and water, with a bit of a flavoring, and that's then carbonated. But I guess the point is that there are a lot of it was apparent that there was demand or interest from a number of producers in launching these types of products. And so again, to stick with our flexibility model, TinyKeg wanted to be able to service that demand for our customers. We thought, to be able to offer both mobile canning as well as in-facility canning, still beverages, carbonated beverages, mixing of those products. So all of that, so we can now do all of those different things. But we initially started working with some craft brewers who were customers of ours, for example, and then we would, the brewery would do the mixing and the carbonating and the cooling of the product, and then we would arrive as a mobile canning company just to do the packaging. But that gets very complicated. There's a lot of parties responsible for delivering a product at the end of the day. So it wasn't really a sustainable way of doing it, and we decided to move into our own facility.
Okay, and
which we've recently done now.
Yeah, I saw that on social media. And does that mean you still using the mobile equipment, but just on that specific day you using it in your own warehouse?
Correct.
Okay.
At this stage, I think we've got a number of options in terms of our next steps. But I think that's obviously the key part, the key thing we would look at. But we made the decision to get the facility up and running. So I guess it's just a lot more capex all at once.
Yeah.
So we got the facility up and running, and we're now sort of mobile in-house. But I guess then the next step is to either have a fixed line here or some different solution. Yeah.
And Tom, your wine customers, do they prefer having it mobile, or could they send their tanker to your facility and have it canned there?
So they can do both. It's one of the elements of flexibility that a wine producer has that a beer producer really doesn't. Craft brewer needs to have their own carbonating tank, carbonation and cooling and pressure vessels and all of that. A lot of wineries use mobile bottling companies. So the concept of mobile packaging in the wine industry is very well understood because of the way that the bottling gets done. So that sort of supports the mobile element.
Yeah.
But then a lot of other producers, prefer just to get the product completely done elsewhere. And there's also quite a lot of brands which are not traditional wine farms, right? So someone creates a brand, they source product, they maybe have a winemaker or they are a winemaker, and they create a product without necessarily having a wine farm or having production facilities. And the same exists in the sort of seltzers and all those other products where a full contract packaging option is actually required because you don't have your own floor, your own space, your own tanks, etc.
Okay, makes sense.
And so now we can do carbonated wine, we can do wine-based mixed drinks, we can do, we've invested quite heavily in water treatment. So we reverse osmosis filter our water. We then de-aerate the reverse osmosis water so we can, so that we can make sure that we have, again, a good quality mix going into the can at the end of the day. But so we can now offer all of those. We can now offer all of those options. But if we talk about beer again, the Joburg and Cape Town are the two cities in the world where it's the cheapest for tourists to buy a mainstream or premium beer. On a dollar basis, we are the cheapest premium beer in the world. So if you want to launch a craft brand into that space, it's extremely difficult. So what we're seeing is that a lot of our demand is for export markets, and particularly so on the wine side. But a can of wine, a can of South African wine in the US, can easily sell for $4 or $5. You're not going to sell that can of wine for $5 in South Africa.
Yeah.
So they're very different economics at play, and I think at this stage, most of what we do is going overseas.
Well, that makes the whole business even more exciting. I think it's wonderful that you've stimulated something that you didn't intend to do, and that it's creating foreign currency.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's we still are a very small. It's not just in our name, but we still are a tiny company, and but it's really awesome to see brands that never existed, and some of our customers, have sent, I don't know, like 5-6 containers of product overseas. And, I remember meeting these folks a couple of years ago, and they had, a few kegs of sort of mixed drinks and 1 keg of wine or whatever. And we were kind of, packaging it for them on the pavement outside our previous facility, because we didn't have the capacity there, doing sample runs and things, and these are now companies that have exported, multiple container loads of product, to different markets around the world. And so it's really, really cool to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom, thanks for sharing your story with us today. It's really, we've seen the product come up to, especially Hillcrest Quick Spa here. We've seen a lot of your cans come here, sometimes on a whole container load. And I think I like cans. I'm a big advocate for cans, and it's really exciting. And I'm really chuffed to hear your story, and that I played a small part in it.
Thanks so much, Ollie. Yeah, it's been really interesting to chat. I know we could probably keep chatting for another hour. There's, once you scratch under the surface, there's so much that goes into putting something like this together.
Yeah.
But now we as TinyKeg, I think we're going to keep to our values and stick to our guns, and try and stay flexible and ensure that the best quality we're able to, and hopefully we can have another chat like this in a few years' time.
Yeah, we'll certainly hook up on my next trip to Cape Town, and you can show me the new facility. Thank you for listening to our stories here online. In the show notes, you will also find a link where you can subscribe to become part of our community and be notified when we upload our latest content.